Hello everyone, my name is Sharif Malak and I'm a privacy and data lawyer at Shoesmiths. Welcome to the third of 8 podcasts in a series that focuses on compliance and management risks. Today we'll be looking at horizon scanning and how it is an important tool to help manage compliance risk. I'm joined today by my colleague, Suzanne Taylor, a commercial partner specializing in financial services. We'll be delving in to all the areas that horizon scanning can assist and also looking at some of the pitfalls when it comes to looking ahead to the future. So Suzanne, welcome. If I could start by asking you, what does horizon scanning look like in 2024?
I think it's complex, isn't it? You know, our clients and the people we work with are operating in complex businesses and a complex world. I think there's 2 particular reasons I think horizon scanning is more complex than it has ever been for our clients. I think number one, a lot of the people we work with are working under the regulation of multiple regulators. So what does that mean? Well, it means different regulators have different standards, they have different principles, different values. They also have different interventionist mindsets. Some are really light touch, some are really are very involved. And therefore, it isn't just a matter of looking at the laws and the regulations that apply in one area. You have to be aware of the framework across all your business area. But also you have to understand what the risk appetite is of that regulator, what is the relationship you have with that regulator, and that then needs to be overlaid with your horizon scanning in order to inform what you prioritise and what perhaps you don't prioritise. I think the second piece that's really interesting now for us is the international element to horizon scanning. You know, we are UK-based lawyers. Many of our businesses work EU-wide, we work globally, and actually it isn't enough just to look at the regulations and laws that apply in the UK anymore. You have to be aware of what's happening in the EU, what's happening globally, because our clients want to sell products and they want to deliver services across the world. I think a really good example of that, one we've had recently, is we've had a lot of inquiries from our clients who are based here in the UK, but they're looking at, for example, the Accessibility Act, which is coming in Europe in 2025, which will look at how you offer services and products across Europe to make sure they're accessible for everyone, regardless of that individual. And our clients need to be aware of that, and they need to be factoring that into how they are offering services, even though it might not directly apply here in the UK. So it's that international element, it's that knowledge of the regulator, and it's actually knowing what these laws and regulations say, which means you have to have a real multifaceted approach to horizon scanning.
That piece around international scope really resonates from a data and privacy perspective, because increasingly certain laws, because of the long reach of the law, are extraterritorial. So before, when you're horizon scanning for domestic law, you might not have something on your radar that could really affect you, especially if you're selling into international markets. And also, I'm sure it's the same with financial services, is that businesses, they're expanding their horizons and their ambitions. They need to actually be prepared for more and more compliance in different regimes that they might not actually be familiar with. And finding that single source or a number of sources from which they can get that heads up is actually not as easy as you might think, not in this day and age. So if I could follow up just by asking, what sort of business strategies, what's the impact of horizon scanning on business strategies, and what sort of strategy do you think clients can adopt in using this?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? If I had £2 for every time I'd heard a client come to us and say, why can't we do this? Competitor X is doing it this way. And I think that is something that is said of internal compliance and legal individuals, as well as external compliance and legal advisors. And for me, horizon scanning and really effective horizon scanning requires a mindset shift of, well, actually, if we know these are the things that are changing, then how does that overlay with our business priorities? What do we want to achieve as a business? What are the things we have to do as a business in order to remain compliant that our horizon scanning has told us we need to do? And actually, how do we build our business strategy so that those two are aligned? So if we know we have to make compliance changes because of a regulation change that's coming in, and we know we're also launching a new initiative or we're launching a new website, then actually how can we make those two work together and make sure we've got the resources we need to deliver that as a whole, rather than thinking, well, actually this compliance change is going to stifle what we're trying to do, or it's going to mean we can't use our business resources to move our business forward. So that knowledge, Horizon Scanning gives you a knowledge and a power to allow you to plan the resources you need, both financial, operational and people resources, to deliver that business. I think for me also compliance can be really exciting because it can allow you to innovate. If you know you have to make a change, then how can you do that to deliver an innovative solution? How can you look at the basic requirement that the change in regulation that makes you comply with and say, well, actually, we think we can take this a step further and we can genuinely innovate and change how we offer our products and services to the markets to be a market leader, rather than what we sometimes see, which is, well, competitor X is doing this and therefore we're gonna mirror that because that's what the industry does. So I think it's a mindset shift of compliance is so easily seen as a blocker, isn't it? Legal and compliance are. How do we shift that mindset to actually thinking, this is a chance for us to innovate and be market leaders? If we have a genuinely compliant business model, we are doing the best thing we possibly can for our customers and for our clients, and therefore we are delivering the best outcome for them.
I think that's, you made a point there around the sort of strategic importance of being prepared, but I think there are very few businesses where being ill-prepared could ever be a business strategy. I think when it comes to compliance generally, and this is certainly true for all things data and digital, is you can obviously be prepared, by which means you can strategically be in a more efficient way of delivering what you need to. But there's also the commercial aspects of maybe looking at whether you can differentiate yourself through excellent compliance. Certainly that happens in privacy because that's so close to people's individual safety and their perception of what is a responsible business or organization. And the other is looking as to whether, and I think we'll be discussing this in a future podcast, I'm sure, but looking at whether, given that you have to invest in certain operationalization of compliance, whether actually you can use the byproduct of that for a commercial benefit somewhere else. So, for example, again, in the privacy world, a lot of organizations had to carry out data mapping, finding out where your assets are effectively in the business, whether they're being stored efficiently, whether they're being used in a way that's serving the business from a compliance perspective, clearly has a benefit from a wider commercial perspective. And I guess that leads me to ask, what about the tools to help with horizon scanning? What's available to organizations who want to do this, who know that it's important, but are wondering where they can get that help from?
I mean, there's lots of material out there, isn't there? And I think sometimes you can be overwhelmed with the information that is out there. And the tip I would give is, what is really tailored for your business? What delivers the output and the information you need, tailored to your sector or to your business, to allow you to differentiate what is important and what perhaps is less important. So we at Shoesmiths work on 2 horizon scanning propositions. So we have our compendium, which is available for our whole client base, and we also have Accelerate, which is targeted at the automotive industry. And they're really great tools in that they give you an overview of what is coming up in the next 6 months, what's coming up in the next 12 months, what might be on the wider horizon. And so it gives you that insight to information as early as the government or regulators are starting to talk about changes. But also the way it's presented, you can very quickly differentiate between that's not relevant to our business, that is relevant to our business, and these are the areas I'm going to focus on. And I think that's really key for advisors who are working internally, whether it be legal or compliance. They are generally time poor, and they need to very, very quickly be able to identify what needs our time and what needs our resource. I think that's a really great tool. I know, Sharif, that this is something you've worked with a lot with clients on in terms of privacy and data. So what have you seen that works well?
Well, I think, again, so the first is, there's been such a proliferation of digital regulation that the first is finding a resource that focuses on what you need, or at least in its breadth actually helps you focus on what you want. And that's why structure is so important. Those updates or resources that just simply blurt everything out in a linear fashion. It's difficult to find what you need, and most of our clients are time poor, or at least want to use their time efficiently. So that's how we've structured our data protection update, so that it tags and using an icon system shows which articles are related to which subject, and also categorizes the developments through, whether it's enforcement or legislative developments, industry news, so that you can find what you need. But I think making sure that you've got the breadth and depth and also the structure really helps with that. But of course, horizon scanning isn't just looking at documents that give you that sort of heads up. It's actually what follows, which is speaking to the stakeholders and telling them that something's coming down the line, and we're going to have to prepare for it, and getting that early head start on a lot.
It's the so what, isn't it? That's what I always translate it to. Our job is to tell people what the law says, but actually what's really valuable is what that means for that business. And you're right, that translation piece is so key for our internal stakeholders. One interesting bit that I thought is really relevant here is one of the things we've seen from the FCA recently is that actually they are expecting firms to be aware of the reasons why they are giving fines and the reasons why they are giving notices. So actually in a financial services regulatory world, horizon scanning isn't necessarily just what's coming, it's what the FCA is talking about with other businesses. So actually an expectation from the FCA that I'm aware of the systems and controls failings in another business and that we are adapting our business to take into account of that. So I think there's a real value in as well in terms of what the changes are coming, but actually as much learning from the mistakes of others and learning from where things have gone wrong in other people's businesses to do a piece of gap analysis to say, well, actually, would the FCA look into our business and say that they think the same gaps exist and potentially lead us and potentially bring them to take action against us? Because actually the FCA has been really clear that if you're not doing that, and those gaps do exist, and they are going to hold you accountable as an organisation.
I think another element of horizon scanning, and I'm sure it may be the case in financial services too, certainly is when it comes to data and digital, is that you are horizon scanning in respect of legislative developments and potentially for other precedents, case law, etc. But once you've realised that there's a operationalisation of that in the future that's going to come, you're also horizon scanning for tools and
absolutely
systems.
Yes.
And then you start horizon scanning of, well, what's happening in the market?
Yeah.
Are vendors on the supply side, are they thinking of building products that are going to help with these compliance needs? So you're not only doing that, but once you realize that you need the tools as well, you begin to, the typical beauty parade of suppliers to understand what you're going to need when D-Day comes and you need to get that done.
Yeah, agreed.
So for those clients and businesses that we've seen get this right, what does good look like?
So again, to take an example from my financial services regulatory world, we had a big regulation change 18 months ago, consumer duty, which is a duty to deliver good outcomes to all your customers. And I think on the face of it, there was two probably ways, maybe three ways businesses went. The perhaps least compliant way is to look at this as a paper exercise. Okay, well, I need to work through all my policies and procedures and make sure I've referred to consumer duty in there. And I'll make those changes, but actually it doesn't genuinely get embedded into our business. Actually, in terms of when that regulation change landed and that consultation paper landed, the businesses that did this really well sat down and looked in detail at what that actually meant for their processes and procedures and what that meant across the customer journey. So, you've already talked about data mapping, very, very similar exercise, but across the customer journey. So what's every single touch point a customer has from us from the minute they click on our website through to when they decide to switch to a different provider at the end of their product. And what is the customer's interaction at every level of that way? What risks exist? How can we mitigate those risks? And actually, how do we genuinely step back and say, have I delivered a good outcome to that customer? So would I be happy with the outcome I'd received if I was that customer? And I think that's really important. And the people who did that, then instead of just saying that we've embedded consumer duty into our business, they had lots of data about actually the outcomes a customer is receiving. And that's commercially really, really valuable data. So if you know a customer is leaving, or 4 out of 10 of your customers are leaving for a particular reason because you've done this customer journey mapping, then you can change that and you can make that customer stay. And you can use that information that arose from a compliance process to actually turn that into a competitive advantage for you. So that's an example of where we've seen it done really well. I think conversely, the examples where we've seen it done less well, I've already referred to it, is, where people have just sat down with their policy frameworks and they've just said, right, well, we'll delete reference to that and we'll add a reference to consumer duty. And they might have the rule book next to them and they might be very, very aware of what the rules say, but they're not embedding that into their business in a way that is genuinely living that purpose. We talked about it before. Horizon scanning isn't just looking at what the rules say, and it's not just looking at what's coming. It's looking at actually, how does this play into my business? What is the commercial overview of what we are trying to achieve, and how do we weave that framework through commercially what we're trying to achieve?
I mean, you mentioned the bare minimum. There may be businesses, there may be contexts where the bare minimum is the sensible play from a business perspective. It could be.
Absolutely.
But when it comes to compliance, ultimately, when you strip it all down, we are talking about rules that are there to address a harm.
Yes.
And where there's a harm, it's usually that the protection is ultimately for people. On that basis, there's almost always a business opportunity to amplify that and say that we're the best at protecting against that harm, or whatever it may be, whether it's privacy, which obviously is something that's very close to people individually, but beyond that, if it's financial services or competition, monopolies, etc., there's something intrinsic there that someone wanting to do the best they can and doing the right things is actually someone who needs to be looked at in a positive light. And I think that's why there's always an opportunity to maybe move away from the bare minimum.
Yeah, absolutely.
Suzanne, thank you for your insight. For everyone listening, thank you very much for joining us. As I said, this is the third of 8 podcasts in this series. If you'd like to tune in to the fourth in this series regarding embedding compliance, then you can join me and my colleague Simon Barnes for that. But in the meantime, please do head on to our website where you can access all the podcasts and also find out more about how we help our clients manage compliance risk in their business. Thank you very much for joining us.